Welcome to the Mayhem Performance Whiteboard Classroom.
Perfect timing. Let's find a name right before we hit shoot. Mayhem Performance Coaching Toolkit.
We're already past hit shoot.
Oh, shoot. What's up, everybody? Jake Foster with Mayhem Performance Coaching. We got Dom D'Agostino over here. And I'm just going to go into this really quick. We've been talking recently and as a coaching staff, and one of the things we're most passionate about is teaching. Keep it simple. We love to teach people. And so we want to teach you as honestly as much as we know about program design, nutrition, all the training topics to get you competing at a higher level. So who is this primarily for? This is primarily for people currently following Mayhem Compete or really any other template blog across any training camp who wants to get better at competing in the sport of CrossFit. That could be somebody who wants to throw down a local competition, compete in the open, all the way up to games training. We're gonna try to add value to all you guys and like I said, teach as much as we know. So Dom, kick us off with the topic we're covering today.
And I would also tell you guys, this is also not just for athletes, but if you're like an aspiring coach or you coach in an affiliate or you have some people who locally compete at an affiliate, go. If you have athletes that compete locally at an affiliate, this is a great way to help learn how to program as well. So we're gonna dive right into what we would call limiter-based training. So what you're doing when we say limiter, we're talking about weaknesses. And the reason we call it a limiter is because it's something that it's a gaping hole or something that is keeping you from progressing either in a specific movement or like in levels. So we have open level, quarterfinal level, semifinal level, games level. What movements are keeping you from either A, progressing to the next level, or B, allowing you to progress in a workout, right? If we're an open or quarterfinal level athlete, a lot of times we come across movements that just stop us in a workout and we can't even express our fitness. So what we do when we say limiter-based training is we're trying to identify those limiters that stop us from expressing our fitness and then learning how to put together a program design that allows us to move the needle on those specific movements.
Again, somebody who think about like an athlete that you have, or you are the athlete who's been following a blog for a long time or a template of any kind, and you've hit plateaus in certain areas. You're like, why is my snatch still stuck at 185, right? Why have I only hit 5 unbroken ring muscle ups for the last 6 months, but I can never get it to 6 or 7 reps, right? Why does it feel like I'm only making maybe marginal improvements at best in my aerobic capacity? Like I never actually really feel that much fitter in my aerobic work. Like Dom was saying, this is for those kind of people who just hit the wall with certain movements or energy systems. We're gonna teach you how to bias those in your training so that you can overcome it.
Yeah, and this is gonna help you figure out too, if you've been following a general template for a long time, like I can even remember for myself, when I first started CrossFit and then got into competing after following an affiliate for a while, I used to follow this thing called the Outlaw Way. And it was like a generalized template.
Rudy?
And I would follow that like to the T. But then like it was so much barbell biased, which I got really good at. And I literally couldn't do a strict handstand push-up to save my life. And so that is when I started seeking out coaching. So that I myself could figure out, well, why can't I get my strict handstand push-ups up if I can bench 305, but I can only strict press 155 or 165. And so that's when I moved away from like templated programming and had multiple days a week of working on my strict handstand push-up and trying to figure out how to express that. And so then that is where the 70% rule is gonna come in, and I'm gonna let Jake take that portion.
Yeah, so honestly, when I was a rookie coach, the 70% rule was the easiest way for me to conceptualize or wrap my head around individual training, because all of a sudden when you start taking an athlete and you think about all the strengths and weaknesses they have and everything that's involved in the sport of CrossFit, gymnastics, all the energy systems, muscular endurance, aerobic training, anaerobic training, like go down the laundry list of things that you have to be good at in the sport, it gets really overwhelming. And so something that I was taught early on by one of my coaches was, man, keep it simple, Jake. Follow the 70% rule. Simply meaning that 70%, as a general rule of thumb, 70% of your training should be devoted towards your limiter or your weakness. And we're gonna go into and show you some examples. What does that actually look like in a training week or in a training day? But before you even get there, really the first thing is to go, what are your weaknesses? What are your limiters? So Dom's gonna jump into how you would identify those as an athlete or as a coach.
All right, so step one is just identifying a limiter, and you can have multiple of them, right? And there can be even like limiter combinations, like a wall ball into a handstand push-up is a really common limiter that people have. But what we want to do today is just kind of help you guys figure out, well, how do I figure out specific movement limiters or specific, like Jake was saying, like energy system limiters, or whether that's upper body pressing muscular endurance. So how do we do that? Well, one, we can test, right? There's a lot of testing out there that you can do, but I think an easy way for most of you guys is just gonna either be A, to look at your most recent training and like what's the one movement that keeps hindering you every time it comes up, and then B, if you've competed in like open or quarterfinals, go back to your open and quarterfinal finishes and check the workout that you did the worst in. And the workout that you did the worst in, which movement is the one that caused you to do the worst in that? And then that's how you figure that out. Then you can start to figure out some trends. So we're gonna get to skeleton in specific in a second, but just using our athlete A, who we have here, is a male.
Bob.
Who,
we're gonna go with Bob.
Yeah, Bob, who benches 225 for a 1 rep max, strict presses 155 for a 1 rep max, can do 6 unbroken ring muscle ups and 4 unbroken strict handstand push-ups. And then I'll even throw in a quarterfinal example there. Let's say he did the gymnastics workout from quarterfinals this year and he couldn't even get to the ring muscle ups because his shoulders were already fried from the handstand push-ups doing singles in order to even get there. This athlete has a pressing limiter. Now, as coaches, we would try to sit around and figure out, well, is that an absolute strength issue or is that a muscular endurance issue or is it both? Which it definitely could be both. Looking at this athlete, definitely could be both, and that's something we're gonna dive into specifically with these two things. But we identified those things for this athlete by looking at his 1 rep maxes on pressing lifts, looking at his quarterfinal or open finish, and then also just paying attention to like different trends throughout his training, which would be like strict handstand push-up, ring muscle up, unbroken here, to figure out if it's also a muscular endurance limiter. And that's how we would identify something like that. And you guys can do for yourselves by simply going back to those areas. If you're not keeping a workout log, you're setting yourself behind. You need to be tracking your training. If you're not tracking your training, it's gonna be way harder to identify limiters. So if you wanna figure out those limiters and those weaknesses and be able to put these two things together, you have to be doing that first and foremost. You wanna talk about what it looks like to put together a skeleton after you identify what you're struggling with?
Yeah, we wanna flip the board or we wanna try to do it here?
Sure.
How do you flip the board?
So we can use our specific athlete A here and we can show you what a skeleton looks like.
Dude, look at that. Isn't that beautiful?
Nice.
I'm gonna let Dom do the writing because when I used to teach 8th grade middle schoolers, and every time I'd write on the whiteboard, my students would always complain that I had no idea what I was writing. So I'll let Dom do the writing. So there's really two ways, just keep it really simple again with the 70% rule, that you can conceptualize this throughout your week. So if you're training 5 days a week, like most people are, traditional CrossFit schedule, training Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, rest or active recovery, and then Sunday they're Sabbathing like you should be, just taking a complete rest day or a day off. So if we have 5 days a week, 70% is 3 days. So the first thing that you can do with your limiter is train it 3 days a week. And one of the easiest setups that we like to do as a staff is simply go Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And why Monday, Wednesday, Friday? Well, one of the biggest benefits of doing that is that you get 2 out of the 3 days are coming off a rest day. So I'm gonna hit my Monday priority. This is kind of my biggest priority day, but I'm doing it right after I rest on Sunday. And then really kind of my second biggest priority day is gonna be on Friday because I'm doing it after a rest day on Thursday. And then I could have like the third priority day or like kind of the lowest, like whatever accessory movements I'm doing for that bigger priority on Wednesday, since I might be a little fatigued after Monday and Tuesday. So that's the first way to think about it. Again, really simple. I'm gonna train it 3 days a week. For the pressing based limiter, Dom, you wanna jump in and show like specifically what that would look like if we had Bob as a client here, how we would begin to attack that.
Sure, so when I'm gonna flip this back over so we can look real quick. I forgot which way I did it. Might be upside. Oh, nice. Press it. So when I look at this, just because the ring muscle up and the bench are a little higher than the vertical, I would say in general, when I'm looking at this, I think the horizontal pressing is a little bit better. Now, it might still be a weakness, but it is a little better than the vertical pressing, right? So the strict press and the strict handstand push-up seem to really correlate to me. And then when I'm looking at this, I'm gonna assume also as well that this is a pressing limiter, not a pulling limiter. That could be different, varying on the athlete. Like the reason he might not have ring muscle up could be a technical issue. It could be a pulling issue, but we're gonna assume this athlete,
real quick, let's jump in and actually show like how many strict pull-ups could he do. That would show you like, hey, that's probably not a pressing limiter. If you have Bob come in and do 16 unbroken strict pull-ups, right, but he can only do 4 unbroken strict handstand push-ups and 6 unbroken ring muscle-ups, you're like, he has pulling muscular endurance and probably strength too as well. So, I mean, that's just like an obvious sign for us. It's like, this is definitely a pressing limiter or an issue. If his strict pull-ups are a lot lower, then we would want to tease that out a little bit more. And we're like, maybe it's both. But to keep it simple for now, Bob can't press. He needs more triceps.
Right.
So
then we flip back to our skeleton. And what we're basically going to do here, and this is probably the most important thing. If there's anything you really take away right here, it's your priority has to go first, right? So if you've always followed like a general template, a lot of times what you can see is like Metcon first. Right, so you're going to come in and you're just going to do CrossFit and then you're going to work on weaknesses. When you're doing that, you're dampening what you can get out of what's a priority. So if Bob has a vertical pressing priority, the first thing we're going to do Monday morning when we come in is some sort of strict press, right? And then all of session 1 as well is going to follow that priority action. Now, if you're a 1-session athlete too, which probably most of us are, then we're going to work that into the session. So it's like absolute strength for A, part B might be working on the same thing, but maybe specifically in like a gymnastics vertical pressing, but it could still be absolute work. So I'm just gonna use that there. And then C, if we need this is normally how I do it, we can do some muscular endurance in the same day, or this would be some sort of accessory that also applies to the priority. And then we would do our conditioning of some sort. And this can be varied or mixed, have nothing to do with the priority. A lot of time, I think coaches have different ideas on this, but would you say for the most part, maybe you go opposite of the priority?
Yeah, typically for Bob, right? Like if he is at a lower level, a lower training age, the Metcon probably needs to be, fancy word, antagonist movements to the pressing. In other words, opposite patterns. So maybe he's squatting in this Metcon, he's pulling in this Metcon, or he's hinging. Because a little analogy I've been taught before is you got to think of training age like a bouncing ball. So the lower your training age is, it's like me dropping a basketball real close to the floor, and your session is just going to die out quickly. The higher your training age is, it's like me dropping it from above my head. It's going to bounce a lot longer. You're going to have more energy throughout the session. So we're going to assume Bob is a little bit lower of a training age. He's not going to be able to just press for 90 minutes straight, because by the time he's doing his skull crushers at the end of the workout, after he's done strict press, close grip bench press, and now he's already done some, lateral raises or some Bradford press overhead, he's just doing 10-pound skull crushers, and we're really just kind of wasting our time now. There's no intensity there anymore. So.
Good. Then on Tuesday, typically what we would look like a Tuesday, Saturday, these are just going to be, and I'm going to keep it simple, these are just going to be our lower days. Whoops, can't, right.
AKA maintenance work, just doing what he's already good at, or better term is maybe better at, right? We're just maintaining everything else. So if we're doing a lot of pressing work with some conditioning, this is lower body training, maybe we're throwing some of his Olympic lifting in here too as well. We could put that in some of the Monday, Wednesday, Friday as well. But it's just maintenance of everything else. You kind of pile it in here. And again, too, you can have some maintenance work on the back end of these. And like Dom was saying, front loading all of your weakness work. I think one thing Dom did already here too, I can let you dive in on it, is if we remember with Bob, Dom was specifying that he had a vertical pressing limiter. So we've got Monday, he's doing strict press and vertical pressing. And then if you look at Friday over here, he's back to doing vertical pressing again. So we have his 2 top priority days again, on Monday and Friday off a rest day, are doing vertical pressing, which is his biggest weakness. And then on Wednesday, where he's a little more fatigued after 2 days of training, will go his secondary priority under his main limiter, which is now he'll do some horizontal pressing.
Yeah, and this is just typically something just the way I personally think when I'm writing something like this for an athlete like that is vertical press, horizontal press, and I'm going to do this more in this is for absolute strength. I'm going to do that more on these 2 days, and then when I get to the Friday, I'm going to do more of a gymnastics accumulation day. This does not have to, when it says handstand push-up accumulation, depending on the person, since he only has 4, I'm not just gonna slam him with 1,000,000 strict handstand push-ups until he fails. I'm gonna start working the strict handstand push-up in different variations, whether that's feet on a box, right? Doing that with parallettes, doing push-ups on parallettes. And I'm gonna do the same thing here for ring muscle up accumulation, but it's gonna be broken down of the movement. We might not actually be doing the strict handstand push-up or the ring muscle up. We're going to work dip positions. We're going to work different holds, static holds.
Taking a pattern and breaking it into its parts, constituent parts. So taking a ring muscle up and going, it's a vertical pull, it's a downward press, and then just breaking it down. So it doesn't have to just be like Dom was saying, more ring muscle ups, more handstand push-ups. Also just in case anybody's wondering, accumulation is a fancy word for like building volume. We're just gonna do more work over time. So he's gonna build how much volume this individual client is doing on Fridays with his gymnastics training over time.
Cool. And then I think big picture aspect, like once I lay this out, so absolute strength, more absolute strength focus, and then this is more of like a muscular endurance gymnastics focus. What I'm gonna do through this is I'm gonna say like, okay, how long do I wanna build this out as well? So I gotta think about this on a macro level. So I might wanna do this for 4 weeks, exactly how it's written here, and then the next 4 weeks, I might either want to create movement variants here, keep the same plan, but then also progress these where we actually start to do the movements on the wall. So if I was doing these on a box and accumulating reps until I felt confident that that athlete was actually building volume in the handstand push-up, then maybe I would move them onto the wall, but with a riser, and we would accumulate reps with a riser. And then same thing with the ring muscle up. Like maybe now I move them to like a higher level skill of pressing or more volume in the pressing. And then what I would try to do if I'm looking at this on like a 12-week plan in some fashion, this is just an example, this final week, I'm moving all to the actual movements is the goal. And so I'm actually trying to accumulate reps of ring muscle up and strict handstand push up, and maybe not just isolated. I also might start doing this in Metcons. So really the goal and the idea of these 4 weeks is these 8 weeks is to build foundation so I can help this athlete start to figure out how to translate this into a fatigued setting. But I don't start with the fatigued setting when I work on a limiter. When I work on a limiter, I'm gonna isolate all of those things completely unfatigued so they actually have the energy to do it. That's why we call it a priority.
Yeah, what Dom's touching on here, just keep it simple, is it's called periodization, right? So he's periodizing the training. He's thinking, what's the end goal? Where do I want to be? And then working backwards from there and reverse engineering the plan. Do we want to show, just to wrap it up, like one more example of how you can use the 70% rule if you're not doing Monday, Wednesday, Friday?
Sure.
Let's get our trusted eraser.
Yes. Towley, if anybody watches South Park. Hopefully not.
Here at Mayhem, we have the highest tech products in the industry. Nothing better than a good towel. So second option you could do with a 70% rule, as Dom is setting up the board, is instead of thinking of 5 days a week of training, you could literally just think about it single days of training. So you could go, hey, if I have 1 day of training and I'm doing 5 pieces in that single day, like an A, B, C, D, and E component to my training, again, 3 out of the 5 could be devoted to your weakness. This gets a little bit trickier if you're thinking about that every day now, right? Because if you have 5 training sessions or 5 pieces within 5 training sessions, that's 25 total pieces. If you do 3 out of 5 every day, that's 15 out of 25. It's starting to be a lot and you're hitting it every day. So just a really quick example of how we might do this. It's still gonna almost start to look very similar to how we set it up on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but you wanna do kind of like A, B, C, D, E on like Monday, Tuesday.
Should we keep it ABCD?
ABCD is fine, yeah. It'll be 75%, but we can live with it. Yeah, so again, this is starting to get to be a lot if you set it up this way, so you gotta be careful with how you structure it. But one way that you could do it, again, within a single workout is you could think about, okay, maybe this is my press absolute strength again, so I'm gonna do some strict press here. And then maybe on B, I'm gonna do some accessory work, right? And then if I came on to Tuesday, right, I'm already kind of fatigued from this. So Dom, you can jump in here too. But one way that you could do this to keep it simple, there's a couple different tools in the toolbox. One is you could do some skill development. And the key with skill here is that we're doing it in a non-fatigue setting. So you're never coming anywhere near failure. You're like, there's no grind on any rep. You're not hitting the wall by any means. Here's an example of skill work with a ring muscle up. I'm gonna do 1 to 2 reps on the minute for 10 minutes. Never any fatigue. I'm gonna do 1 rep, film myself, look at the video, critique a little bit, go do another rep. It's kind of 1 at a time. So you can really do that every day if you really wanted to. I mean, that's getting a little risky with that too. So that could be a skill development day. Again, you could almost have 2 skill pieces in this if you wanted to. Another way that I like to do it, if you want additional touches, maybe you did this on Wednesdays, you went low rep, high set. Right, so you could do a Metcon or a conditioning piece where you put in your limiters like strict handstand push-ups. You know, let's say we went strict press, ring muscle up, now we're doing handstand push-up here. But very similar to the skill piece, but you're putting in a Metcon where you're doing reps that are so low you'll never fail on them. Right, so a workout I always think of as Holly Man It's a 30 rounds for time, 5 wall balls, 3 handstand push-ups, and 1 power clean. You could do something Hollyman-esque, 5 wall balls, 3 kettlebell swings and 1 handstand push-up. And so you're just moving the whole time and you're never coming anywhere near failure and you're just getting additional touches on that movement. Then Friday you could come back in and you could do your second absolute strength press day. You could do some accessory work again. And then Saturday you could do some skill work. We don't use this as often, like this approach, because I would say it's a little riskier in the sense that you're hitting the same patterns multiple times throughout the week. But I would argue that in the sport, at some point it's necessary because the sport demands it. Yeah, because movements overlap over the course of a competition weekend, even at a local competition. You might have like 3 out of the 5 events that are burning and blowing up your shoulders, right? So at some point you have to be able to do this. This is maybe a tool that we might use closer to competition.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing too is like if you do go this route, and you can kind of see how I put it up here, but we're going vertical here, then I put ring muscle up, skill development here, even though it's lower, it's still like more of a horizontal press. So it's a slightly different plane. And that's how I would think about it, is like, can I change planes even if I'm still pressing? And then I bring us back to like the handstand push-up here, which is like another vertical, but we're doing other movements like trunk flexion, rowing. That was just an example of like what he was saying by high set, low rep.
You could do strength work with your press every day if the volume is not too high. Yeah. Right. Again, training age matters there, and there's so many what ifs, but it, like Dom is saying, he's making a good point. If you change the plane that you're doing, you're working different, slightly different muscles each time, so you can get away with it, so to speak. Yeah. But yeah, the model we typically use the most is when we're looking at the whole week, kind of plug in that Monday, Wednesday, Friday. That's a good starting point to begin thinking about limiter-based training.
Yeah. I would say like just a couple last things to take away. If you're kind of putting this together for yourself and you're trying to go, okay, well, I'm going to go analyze what my limiters are. Then I'm going to try to put together a skeleton. Like, what are major things that I want to just like pay attention to as I kind of, at the end of the day, you're going to have to guinea pig a little bit. And that's even what we do as coaches, is like we learn while we program as well. And we learn how much athletes can handle and how much they can't.
We have it all figured out. Don't listen.
So it is like, this is something like, that's why we lay out skeletons, so we can have a plan. So I think that's number one, is like actually have a structured plan. If you're not following a structured plan, you're like, I'm just going to throw in handstand push-ups 3 times a week, you're probably not going to get better. Like probably at all. Because you might need to develop the skill, you might need to develop the absolute strength of it, or you might need the muscular endurance, and there's a bunch of other ways to attack that. The next thing I would do is, you don't have to do, a lot of people probably in the CrossFit world won't like to hear this. You do not have to do the movement to get better at the movement. Doing the movement 700 times doesn't get you better, especially if there's a skill deficiency. So doing more ring muscle ups doesn't always get you better at ring muscle ups. Breaking down the movement pattern and developing that is usually what happens. And then, like I said, this accessory work and these things, when we're laying stuff like this out, we're doing that to get better at handstand push-ups. So I technically might only have to do the strict handstand push-up 1 time a week. And the other things we're doing on the other 2 or 3 days is getting us better at the handstand push-up without doing it.
I think a catchy way of putting it is, you're finding the limiter within the limiter, right? So you've identified your limiter. Oh, it's pressing, right? But where is my press limited? And so, it's handstand push-ups is my limiter. But what's limiting the handstand push-up? Is it your triceps, right? Is it your shoulders? Or is it a skill deficiency? And then you can identify the limiter within the limiter. And like Dom was saying, you don't then just have to do a bunch of handstand push-ups. Doing a lot of tricep work is going to make you better at your handstand push-ups, if that's your limiter within the limiter, so to speak.
Yeah, I thought of the word while he was saying it, transfer. We want transfer. I want my accessory to transfer to handstand push-ups. I want my strict press to transfer to handstand push-ups. I want my bench press to transfer to ring muscle-ups. I want to create transfer. So if I can think of exactly what is the limiter in the movement, muscularly or neurologically, then I can create transfer by doing other movements so that I can do it every day too. Does that make sense? And then lastly, just something to pay attention to is like overuse. If I have a legless rope climb learner, at some point I'm going to need to work on legless rope climb, and I might need to do them frequently, but we have to pay attention to the things that stresses.
Elbow tendonitis.
Elbows, rotator cuffs, all of that stuff. Pay attention to how your body's feeling. If things start to flare up, don't just keep hammering your limiters until your elbows are broken, because then you just have to quit working on your limiters. right? And that happens. It can happen. Like, especially when someone has a big hole, we're gonna try to do it frequently. Pay attention to that, and don't be afraid to change things up and try to find a transfer.
But what helps I'm gonna use the whiteboard. What helps avoid overuse is having a plan.
Yeah,
Right?
100%.
And to go back to what Dom was saying earlier, where he was mapping everything out, periodizing the training, reverse engineering, if you follow this like stair-step approach, this is the best way to do it, which is build and accumulate volume over time. You don't just go from here to here. That's how you end up with overuse injuries, right? So titrate it up slowly, week to week, and then have a back off, and then titrate it up again, and then back off, and then build it up again and back off. So
Let's add a fourth point.
let's go.
You made me think of
We
it.
could do this all day.
Deload. If you're not deloading when you're working on limiters, you're
See,
gonna die.
these are deloads. You couldn't tell? Those are great. Yeah.
Anybody who just trains at 100% intensity year round always gets hurt.
You want to flip it around? We'll summarize it real quick and wrap it up. Yeah, you do the flipping here.
Perfect.
Limiter-based training, use the 70% rule. You could do it daily, thinking about approximately 70% of what I'm doing as a rule of thumb should be devoted to the limiter. Identify the limiter. Like Dom was saying, look at past workouts, look at your results. What did you do the worst in? What's the thing that always bottlenecks you? And then again, take it a step deeper. You can try to think about, hey, what's the limiter within the limiter? What is really keeping me from getting better at handstand push-ups, so to speak? Attack it 70% of the time. And you want to add anything? I was going to wrap up with one more thing. There's so much nuance with all this, right? And that's where Dom and I could keep talking and come up with different examples and be like, well, what in this scenario? What in that scenario? If you're somebody who's like, man, that was helpful, but I have questions about like me. And you talked about handstand push-ups, and I struggle with, snatching, or actually no movement. Like I'm not limited in my movements. My aerobic capacity is terrible. How would I apply this to aerobic work? Email me, jakefoster@mayhemnation.com. We'll put my email in the description of the video below. Literally shoot me an email, ask me all you want. I'll give as much information as I possibly can. This is my passion. I know it's Dom's passion. We love to teach, so hit us up.